Welcome to the EZCODE Projects Series Maze video number 9. If you have not done so already, please complete the previous EZCODE Projects Maze series videos. For those of you that have done so, let's begin. Now, in the last video, we started to refactor our code base. We created a separate library that helped us separate the maze setup with the maze build logic. In this video, we'll continue our refactoring and apply our new library to the rest of the code. Remember, just type as I do. Pause the video or slow down the speed when needed. Understanding comes later. Let's begin. Open the maze project directory in VS Code. So we'll open up VS Code and we'll hit the Explorer, open folder. We'll find our project wherever you put it. We'll go to the source folder, that's fine there, open it up. And here we can see we're going to open up the code.js file. And while we're at it, let's just hit the library.js file and just select the code.js when you're done there. And let's just start at the top. Now we have several constants that we can easily put in our CSS and value libraries. So we're talking about this area here. And if you recall from our library, we have two distinct objects here, the CSS and the value, that we can dump a few more hard-coded values into that. Now, let's see, we have several, we're going to check on how we use each one. So let's see, the columns and the rows are used like a value. So let's add these two to the value library. So we're going to add these two right now. So let's just go to the value library and we'll go down to the library anyways. We'll go down to the value here where it has div and container, and let's just start just above the div and we'll call it rows, and our value, let's say let's just go ahead and make it 20 for now. And we'll come down here and just above that and we'll do columns. And we'll make that 20 as well. Don't forget your two commas here. And now we'll need to change the rows and columns loop to use these changes. So let's just I'm going to do a quick save here before I go back to the other file. And right here, let's just remove what we just replaced. And we'll save real quick there. Now, let's see, we'll need to change the rows and columns loop. So if we go down here, if we recall, we have rows here. So that would become our library name, which actually here is going to be value, just like we have here, value container, value div, and we'll do value rows. And now we got to find, we'll just do a quick find there for columns. Here we are down here. Somewhere around 127, and we'll do a value dot, and that should take care of that. We'll do a quick save. And now that that's done, we'll look at the top again. Let's go back up to the top of the file, and we see we still have column height and column width. Okay, so let's look and see how these are being used before we just jump out of here. So let's go. We're going to find let's see, we'll find this one here. Where is it in the file down here? So column height, we're looking through here. Did I skip it already? Here we go. So we got the column height down here, and just to check, we can see we have two occurrences of 2. So the first one was the top one and the second one was this one. So there's only 2. And we can see that there's not just 2 styles that have to do with the column div, but there are we have width, we have display, we have align items, justify content, box sizing. So there's quite a few that we could kind of just zip up into one thing. So let's add a class like object to our CSS that has all the column styles. And so we could just rip out all of these things here. So let's just go back to our library. And we're going to go down to our CSS, which we have something there already, flex column. You can see we have a couple different properties already tied in here. And we're going to make a new class. and we're going to call it maze column. And we'll do the colon and then the brackets, and right after the bracket you can do your comma and then just come back in and open up the brackets. Either way, we have a key value pair, right? Here's the key, here's the value, here's the key, here's the value, and that is of this object here. So we have a maze column and we got a bunch of stuff to put on there. So we're just gonna, let's see how we're gonna do this here. We had a, let's see, I'm gonna run back quick and see what our height and our width was at the top. It was 30 px. So let's go back over here to our library and we're gonna say height, colon, and we're gonna do a string, of course, value of px. Now, just to show you, we're using strings here, but we can do other ways of doing this. We could just put width like this, but we're gonna keep everything the same. So we're just gonna make it a width here. The same thing, 30 px, and I'll show you why here in a second when we go through our properties that have a hyphen. And we have display, and our display was flex, and you're more than welcome to copy paste these in here from the code if that serves you, but it's always good to practice typing these things out. And then align items, so we have a hyphen there. Once again, in that case, we can't do a key like this. It has to be wrapped in a string because a hyphen isn't allowed in normal variable type names in JavaScript. So align items is going to be center, comma, and then we're going to do justify content. All properties that are part of the flex property of CSS, justify content, and justify content is going to be center. So we're just copying what we've already done before. And then we had box sizing. So you can see, we're eliminating a lot of this kind of setup configurations from our code, which really makes reading code a lot easier. So let's hope I spelled all these right, and if we didn't, we'll see soon enough. So we're going to go library, we're going to save this, and I'm going to go back to the code.js file, and we have a few things going on here. So we were down here, and I know I mentioned before we were talking about these styles here, so let's go ahead and get rid of these. So we'll do that. We'll put in what we're replacing it with first, which would be a column. Now that we're doing this, let's see, we are doing column div. We'll keep that as it is, and we'll say column div set, and we already made that function, so we know we just have to call maze and column, and then give our semicolon at the end. And then also, let's not forget, we have a way to get rid of this as well. So does everyone remember what we had there? It was our library that we called max, and we said let's make, and we already have the value div is what we need here to make the column div. So we got the column div here, we got the set all of these properties, and now what we can do, and this always feels good going through code, is we're going to highlight them all however you need to do that, and we're going to delete them. And so let's save our work and open our view HTML in the browser. So we'll go ahead and make sure we save our work here, and now we're going to open up the browser, and we're going to see if we have any issues here. So we're going to go to File, Open File. You'll find your projects here, EZCode, Maze, and then your source, view HTML. That's the file we load that loads our JavaScript. And so I can see we still have a maze. I'm going to open up the console as well, and let's see, we don't have any console errors, so that's good. And just to refresh here, just to make sure everything's looking good, our maze is still randomly generated. Now let's get back to our refactoring. So we'll go back to VS Code here, and we can see that let's see, What do we got here? We got the if statements that apply to the outer maze borders can be included in our new set method as well. So just like we're doing this here, setting a CSS, it looks like we can do and use those same things here and here and here and here. So let's go ahead and we'll just change them now, and then we'll add these values a little bit later. So I'm going to go ahead and break into the first if statement here, and we'll say column div, which is our const up here, which is our actual HTML element, and we're going to say set, and from that set, what do you think we're going to call this type of border? Now this is a very specific thing because it's saying row index 0, which is the first row. So this is really CSS. Let's get very descriptive here, and we're going to call this the outer border, just in case when we do these values later on, we might be able to differentiate between the outer border of the maze and the inner borders. So I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to delete this now, and then we're going to go down here again, and we're going to go to this next line, and we'll say the same thing again, set and CSS dot outer border, and we can see it's bottom, not just by the last row index, but also because we have border bottom down here. So we'll get rid of this one, and let's not forget our semicolon at the end. And then here we're going to do a column div, same thing. You can see how repetitive this gets. That's great. It makes us really good typers. CSS dot outer, and we can see it here, border left. And then we'll go ahead and semicolon, outer border left. That looks right. We'll get rid of that one. And then once again, column div set function, and we'll say CSS library outer border, and this is the right one. So once that's done, we'll delete the last bits here, and now let's add our new CSS properties that we just created, because that's what we wanted. And we'll save our work up here. Now we save our work going into here. Go to the library. Now we're going to add the CSS properties to our CSS. So we'll go down here and we'll just go below flex column here, make a column. Again, these are just key values with key values nested inside as an object. So we're going to do that again. We're going to say directly, if you recall, we had outer underscore border. Now what I'm going to do here to make it a little bit quick is I'm just going to say colon, and we're going to do an object like this, and we're just going to say, you can do the same thing if you want. We had 4 to do, so we had 1, 2, 3, 4, and what we'll do is we'll just start up here, and we'll say the first one was what? It was border top, and now we can do kind of a little bit quicker. And what do we have here? We had border lowercase this time, border top, because it has to match what CSS expects, and we had 1px solid black for the color, and I'm just going to kind of copy paste that line as well. Forgot we got to enter that in here, so let's do that as well. And let's see if we can make this one. Nope. So I got to go here and go ahead and type these out. Oops. And what do we have here? We have a lot of the work done, because these are all the same things pretty much, except for outer border top, which we have. And then what do we have here? Top, that's good. Let's come back down here to this one. This one was bottom, so we had underscore bottom. Great. We're just going to change the top to bottom. And what was the next one? Underscore left. And here, instead of top, it was left lowercase. Once again, a little bit of typing going on. This is great practice. And we have border right. So the values were all the same, 1px solid black. but we had outer border top, so we'll just scan it over again to make sure we got this right. Border top, outer border bottom, outer border left, outer border right, border right. So once again, we have control over these names that we're using, and we're just going to process what CSS expects, which is lowercase in this case, border bottom, border left, border right. So we've just completed, and we don't need a column there or comma there, so I'm just going to take it out, and we'll go ahead and save our work in this file, and let's just return back to the code.js file here, and we'll start at the top. And what we'll do is we'll just get ready to see if there's something else in this file that we have to take care of. And while we're at it, we can go ahead and get rid of these two, because now we're consuming them from the library, and just go ahead and get rid of any empty lines there so that window on load is at the top. Okay, so let's continue with our file here, and we're going to search for more border values. So we'll say border hyphen, and we'll kind of look around here. We have 1 of 8, so here's 1. Now let's see, we have border right, which is inside our first row loop. So this is an inner border right. This is part of the maze. What else we got? We got down here, we got border bottom, which is also part of the inner borders. Let's see, this one isn't an assignment. This is just asking if there is a border, so let's skip that one. Now, this is interesting. We have a border bottom, but we're setting it to a blank string. Again, this is part of our inner border of the maze. Let's see, what do we got here? We got something else going on here. If row index 0, so this is the top row once again. And the top row is an outer border. So we have another outer border to add that we didn't see before, because it wasn't down in the if block. So this one's also a border top with a blank string or an empty string. And if we keep going down, this one's an inner border, that's empty. Border bottom, this is also, this right here would be an outer border, because this is looking for, what's it looking for here? We're in the row index of the last row, and if you remember, we're doing special work for that row, and this is an outer. So we need border bottom, outer border bottom empty, and outer border top empty, as well as our inner borders. So this is a new thing that we're doing. We're specifying something different between the inner borders applied to the maze, which are part of the maze, and the outer borders. And that'll just give us a little bit more configuration later on, that we can do something cool with the maze. So let's look at what we got here. We've got to set all these, but let's just go to our library and get that work done. So we have quite a bit of work here already, and we can see this looks really similar, except for its inner, so we could just copy and paste. But before we do that, let's go ahead and set up our border top and border bottom. So we can go ahead and let's take this one, and we're going to go paste, and then right below here we're going to paste, and we just have to remember where we're at here. Outer border, and in this case we're going to say empty, so we know what's going on in our code, and that's a border top empty. That's correct. And then here we're just going to assign nothing, so that's an empty value. Border bottom, and again this one is going to be border bottom empty, so don't forget, if you copy paste, you're going to run into trouble if you don't remember what you're doing here. So our outer border bottom, that's what we wanted, and that means that this has to be bottom, because I copy pasted it from the top one. And then once again, we're going to find that this is just going to be an empty string, so we can easily call or easily set the border bottoms with the properties with something very descriptive in our code. And now that we have that, we can pretty much, we have to do an inner border right, inner border bottom, inner border right empty, and inner border bottom empty. Because on the inner maze, there's just right and bottom. There's no left, there's no top. So we need 4, and really the 4 that we need for the inner, if we go up here, we could just say this one because it has an empty, and this one because it has an empty. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go below down here, outer border, and I'm on line 58, if you can see that. Just remember the line you're on, because that's where the paste is going to happen. And now I know that I can go back to line 58. Let's see. Did I go up there? Where did it go? Up. Where's it at? There it is, 58. Okay, so we have an outer border top, which, right, that's not going to be that way anymore. This is going to be an inner, and it's going to be an inner border right is going to be the first one. And the inner border, of course, is still going to have the same value, so 1px solid black, but this part for the CSS is going to be border right. So that's corrected. So now we just have to go down the line here. So this, once again, was inner, and it was border, and it wasn't top, it was right, and it was a right empty. That was one of the ones that we did need. So it is empty, and let's go back over here and just say right. Lots of typing. Make sure you go over this, and if you have any mistakes, just make sure they're not there. Here we have inner border bottom. So that was, let's see, inner border bottom. That should be right. And then we have border bottom, which is good. That's already good there. And our 1px solid black, that makes sense. Here it was inner, of course, border bottom empty, and the border bottom empty. So this actually worked out really well on our copy paste, but the top one didn't because it wasn't right, which is fine. We just had to change it with inner border right, inner border right empty, border right is empty, inner border bottom. I'm just checking this over. I make typos all the time. Inner border bottom empty. And that looks really good. So we have a way to call all these different values, and we can apply them now in the code.js file. So let's go ahead and just save our work so we don't forget to do that. And we'll move back to the code.js file, and we have to kind of go, I'm going to go through the arrows here. We're just going to go to 1 at the top again. And can we imagine what this is going to be? So we'll keep the line there. It was column, and then we already have our methods, which is set. And then we just have to remember what this would have been. So this would have been inner border right, and it's not empty. Whoa. My caps lock is going berserker here. CSS, I'm just going to spell this one out again. Inner border right, and we can see that makes sense. Now we can get rid of this one, and we'll go ahead and do that. And now we're just going to go back down, and we're going to find the next one. And the next one, we know these were all inner borders. So once again, I'm going to say column, and we're going to say set, because we know it has that method we added. And our CSS is going to be inner border bottom, semicolon, and this looks good. We know we have these values set and they're good, so we're going to get rid of that one. Here we have something we're not dealing with right now. This is not an assignment, this is more of a question, but we do have this one. So we have, are there any blanks? And so this one, once again, was for the inner. So we're going to say set CSS inner underscore border. So it already has. I'm going to tab through that one, but this one was the special property where we said empty. So that's the value we want. That's looking good. We'll get rid of that one. This was row index. This was an outer one. Do you remember? Because it's row index 0. So we're going to say column dot set CSS dot outer border top, but it was empty. So we have an empty string there. Great, we're going to go ahead and get rid of that one, and we're just going to move down the line here. This is a border right, so we are once again back on the inner border, set CSS. This is really redundant, inner border right empty. And that was the assignment we had there. Get rid of that one. And now we're down to, that was the inner border right, and now we're down to this one here, which is border bottom of the last row that we're asking here. So outside of this, which is great, this is where we were randomizing, if you remember, the last row to get an exit. And so this would be a column set. Let's remember how to do that one. CSS dot outer border bottom empty. Say that 5 times fast. So here we go. We'll get rid of that one. And it looks like we've got, let's just go through these. We got this one, which again isn't assigning anything. It's just saying, hey, does this have a value? As in, is it an empty string or does it have something in the string? Same with this one. So we've caught what looks like all the border assignments for the styles. So let's go ahead and we're going to save our work, and let's refresh the browser and cross our fingers that everything works. So I am saved on both files. I am going to the browser now and I'm going to refresh, and it looks like we have our borders. We've got a entrance and an exit. There's no console errors here. Everything's looking good. So now let's go back to our file. Once again, we did look around, so I'm just gonna get rid of that search result there, and now we can know that we did get all the assignments for the border. Now, there were a couple more border items. If you remember, there was a border hyphen. We had 2, and they were kind of more, they weren't about assignments. We weren't assigning an empty one or anything else. And so let's just use our imagination for a second and say, how would we like to see the code? How would we like to read this to understand what's going on? Because really, this doesn't tell you too much. So if instead of just asking for a truthy value, because that's all this is saying, it's saying, hey, everyone is true, as in it has a truthy value, meaning it has to be a string longer than 0. Again, this is an empty string. This is a falsy value. This with a space in it is not. So, you know, any type of items in the string make it truthy. So that means that we have the 1px solid bottom assignment or solid whatever. So let's go ahead and we're going to get rid of this here and just imagine for a second that we added another method. And instead of set or add, we're going to say column has. And this gives us the opportunity to ask a question if something is truthy or falsy, like if it's set. And so we'll say, this hasn't been made yet, we're just making it up. And we'll say column has. And in this case, I'm looking for a property. So I'm not looking for a type of CSS property in there. So I think a good place to put this value is going to be in the value library and not the CSS, because we wouldn't set this in any way. It's just asking for a property of border bottom in this case. So let's go ahead and call it a value, and we'll say value border bottom. And that placing it in the value really helps read it as well, because we're saying, does the column have a value border bottom? So that reads a bit easier on the eyes, and we're just going to go ahead and we're going to copy that, and we're going to go down to the next one, and it's the same thing. So we can say, you know, how's that going to read when we say we're going to create a set number, and first we're going to ask the question, is the row equal to null? Or, and in this case, instead of saying column style border bottom, we're going to say, and I forgot the C, so I'm just going to paste it in there like that. So row equals null or column has value border bottom. That really specifically targets an understanding of what's going on here. So why don't we go ahead and we're going to save our work here up here. Boom. Our little white dot is gone. And let's go ahead and add our new method that we just blindly created out of nowhere, because we are programmers and magicians at the same time. So let's go to the library here. I just close this find box to get rid of those highlights, and let's see. Does everyone remember how we were adding these things? So we were using a bit of a tactic down here. So we have create set, we have create add, and we'll just go below this thing and we'll say function, and we'll say create has. And the same thing before, just like the other ones. We're going to create a function with curly braces, and the function's going to return a function. And so in this case, we would expect that inside of the return statement, we're going to ask for the style property. But you know, just to keep things kind of the same as before up there, I'm just going to say style, and we're going to open up our function here, and we're going to say return style. So in here, we're going to say, okay, return. And what we have is we have the element up here that's in question. And so we have access to that, even though we're returning a function. And this isn't part of what's returned, we still capture this item inside of our new function we're returning. So we can easily say and ask questions to say element, and we're going to ask the property style on the element, and we're going to say style once again. So we have element.style. This gets into the style object, and we're just going to pass in whatever value comes in here. If you remember, it was value dot border bottom. So just to see what that looks like, this would end up being, this style would be a string of border bottom or whatever we pass in. So we're asking the property, does it exist? And that's going to call its value that's on it. So a blank string is going to be false, or at least falsy. So instead of just kind of letting it go here and saying truthy or falsy, excuse me, what we'll do is we will go to the beginning here, and what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this in parentheses. So we're asking about this entire thing, and what we're going to do is we're going to use the bang operator, or the exclamation mark, which looks like this. So what this does, the bang will invert if there's only one of them, and if there's two of them, it won't invert it. So to give a quick example of what that is, let's just go to the browser real quick, and we'll say we have an empty string. Okay, so is an empty string falsy or truthy? Like, what type of Boolean would it be if it was a Boolean? And this is how we can see it. We can say, because what we want to know is it true or false? And that's why we say truthy or falsy, because it's not the actual Boolean true or Boolean false. It's an empty string. So we could, to get its Boolean value, what we use is a double bang. So if I did double bang stg, I can see that it's false. But a single bang inverts whatever you put in front of it. So if the string in this case, we know it's falsy. But if I put a bang in front of it and invert it, it's a true. So one bang inverts whatever you put it in front of. So let's just say we have a number of 0. 0 is also falsy, but 1 is not. 1's truthy. So let's check this out. Let's invert num. You can see it's true. And if I double bang it, we can see that it's false. So we use the double bang all the time just to move it into, hey, I want a real value of true or false is what I want to look at. And then let's just take the 1, and we'll throw, let's just do a double in front of the 1. You can see that it's a true, that the actual number 1 is true. And if we used just one bang, it's going to invert it. So the bang is used all the time in all programming languages, and you'll get used to using it as we use it. So here we go. What we're going to do is we're going to force our function to always return true or false, and that's based on whether this object lookup is going to return an empty string or a string with values in it, and then it's going to be true or false, which is exactly what we want when we're looking for our items in here. When we're saying, hey, we're asking this question, column has, boom, this is going to come back true or false, exactly what we need in a ternary here. So let's go back to the library. We have our function down here. Now we just have to add it. So let's scroll up here, and we're going to add it to our max library, and we're going to add it to each element just like we did before, because any element coming in our library gets all these methods. So we'll go ahead and we'll just start typing element has equals create has element. And here we go. We're just going to copy paste this. Boom. Now we've quickly added something new to our library. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to save it. And now in the code.js file, let's see, we've already changed the values, or at least the function calls for our new function, but we haven't added the last actual value of it, so this bit. So let's go to our library, and let's go to our value near the bottom here, and we're just gonna dump it at the end of container here. So we're gonna say border bottom, and we're just gonna put in the actual CSS property name like that. So we have border bottom, what we're calling it for our library, and the value that CSS calls it. We're going to go ahead and save it. And this should be it for our set methods. So let's scroll to the top, and we'll go back to our code.js file here. All right, we are chugging along here. So let's look around at our code again, and let's look for things that are happening over and over again. Now I can see I can see the get attribute, let's see, set attribute, get attribute. Once again, this is on an HTML object, and we have a bunch of those get attributes, set attributes. So here's something else that we can kind of just add to our library, make something a little bit easy on that one. So what do we do when we get an attribute? We just pass in one argument, and when we set, we pass in two. So, and the first one's the same. So let's go ahead and go to our library and kind of just guess our way through this. And we're going to add another. So we're going to go down here, make another closure, and we're going to use a function, and we're going to say create. Now in this case, instead of saying data set or calling it what it is already, I mean, what are we creating here? We're creating like a set number. There's another way, which we know is a unique number. And in programming and in a lot of different IT type of infrastructure, when you want a unique number, we usually reference it or call it by, it's an ID. It's an identification. So I like to use that because it's such a short 2 characters to describe something that we know is unique. So let's just say create ID that's what we're going to call it. We're going to pass in the element because this is how we add the closure to the element. And we need to do a couple things in here. So the first thing is, for a closure, always return the element. And now I'm going to go ahead and just type ID here, and then we'll talk about it. And we're going to do the arrow function. We got our braces open. Now the second argument, if you remember, when we pass in the second argument, it's always going to be the set attribute, even though it starts with an A on that one. So set attribute, and data set was kind of given on both of them. So we can just say data set ID. And if this isn't right, we're just going to go ahead and say, okay, and I forgot to put something here. Let's just open this up. We need an if statement. And we're going to say if there's an ID, then we're going to do this. So just break that open, bring up what we typed, and stick it in the if statement. So if there's an ID, then we understand it's going to be a set attribute. And what we'll do is just do an else. And if it's not the other way around, then we're going to say, okay, well then please get that attribute. So we'll just go ahead and return the element get attribute, and it's going to be data set because that's what we called it to begin with. So let's just go over this really quick. We have the create ID, which is the set ID, and just to make our library kind of the same thing, we may or may not expect to return an ID if we're setting it, but we may need to use that in our code. So we'll go ahead and return both ways, and we can see that we have a return ID if ID return element set attribute data set ID, and if not, we're going to go ahead and actually get the value because we expect it to already have one. So what's another way looking at this simple if-else statement? We'll go ahead and go above this real quick just to practice doing a ternary. So the same thing can be done on a single line if we did something like this. We said return, and we said let's see. We have to ask the question first for the ternary. So we're going to say if there's an ID. Well, if there's an ID, right? For a ternary, we need a couple things here. We need to say, we need the question here, and then it's always a question mark, and then it's the truthy. If the question's true, we're going to return this, and if semicolon to separate between the two, and if it's false, we're going to return this. So this is always how the ternary is set up. And that's what we're going to do here for a single line. So the question we have here is if there's an ID. If you didn't pass anything in, then the ID is always going to be undefined in this case because I haven't set a value to it. So it'll be undefined here, which is a falsy value. If I needed to figure that out, I could go to Chrome and say, hey, what's undefined? And it's going to tell you that it's false. So we have an ID. We put our question mark up. Now all we need to do is say, what are we returning on the first if statement, and it was set attribute data set ID and colon, and if it was false, we were returning the element get attribute, and it was just data set here as well. So this is the same thing. This is the same thing as this entire if statement. We just did it on one line. We just said return. Return what? Well, if there's an ID, return this. If there isn't, return this. And so let's go ahead and, we're always okay with less code is always better. Best code is no code. And so there we go. We have our one-liner that we have for our function. And if you remember, the next thing we need to do is actually assign it to our elements. So we're going to scroll to the top here. Here we go again. We're going to make a new one. And this is going to be, now in this case, we could do ID like this, lowercase, or we could do uppercase, or however you want to do it. I'm just going to leave it lowercase like this. And we're going to say, well, it's not create has, right? Because this one was create ID, and we're passing in the element. So this is all the work that we have to do to add this to our library and our elements. And now we can update our code.js file with our new method. So we'll go back to the code.js file. Okay, so now that we're back at the code.js file, we can do a search, and we'll just search for dataset because that was on both of the items. We can see we have 8 items. So what are we going to do here? We're going to say let's go back here and we're going to say, that's not what I wanted to say. And we're gonna do the $ID, and remember we don't have to pass it in on a get, so because that's already there in the method. So here we just have to say $ID. Good. And let's see, when's the next one? We're going down here. It's highlighted already. This is a set one, so we have to pass that value in. So let's just go here and we'll say ID. And now we're just passing in the current set. That's great. We have another get attribute here. Again, that's just $ID. And we'll just keep going down the file to see what the next piece is. We got 2 gets here. Easy. So we'll just copy both those and we're going to say ID, and those are gets. So we're done there. And just take your time and make that work. And we'll go down here and we got a couple more. For some reason that entered into my buffer up here. Let's get rid of that so that we get all of them. Okay, now there we go. Now it's saying both of these. So we have a get and we have a set here. So we'll go ahead and let's see, this is a get, so it's just $ID. Good. And this one here is actually providing or setting, which was just ID with the parentheses. So we have an ID, and that's the ID we're setting in there. And our data sets appear to be completed here. Let's just not trick ourselves. I'll get rid of some things. I don't see any data set in here, and it looks like we're good. So let's go ahead and save our work. And we are almost done, but we still have a div to change. So let's look around here. We have a row div hiding out somewhere. There you are, row div. And do you remember how we did this before? We had a max library here to do a div. So this is gonna go, and we had to make a div. So it was something like this: max make, and then it was value div, and that was going to make our row div. Now we can see that here, well, here we got a CSS property again, and we don't really have one for just a flex. So let's go ahead and we're going to say, all right, row div, and we're going to say set. And how do we do this before let's just make one up. It's going to be flex, and it's going to be display flex. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this line here, and we'll go ahead and save our work, and let's go to the library. So we have to go to our library here, and this is what we're doing. We already have value div. This is all created. This works. CSS flex does not yet. So we go here, we go to the CSS. You can see we have no flex, and it's a simple one. We'll just put it at the top here, and we'll say flex. And it was display, and it was flex. That was it. And then we'll just do a comma here to get rid of that error. And we have, I'm just going to save this quick. And now what we can do is, we can kind of look around our library here, and let's see. Let's look around and see that we got a lot of inner and outer here. So what would we do here? I mean, if we had to make a change, if someone said, you know what, I want the outer border to be different. I want it to be 5px, and I want it dotted, and I want a different color. We'd have to go in here and change each one of these items for the outer border, and then what about the inner border? So this is why we have libraries and we move things around like this. So let's instead just go ahead and make a constant at the top for our inner and outer borders. So let's go to the top of our file, and it has to be in the max. I'm sorry, it has to be in our library here. and it would be right here in the CSS. So our closing function is going to fire and return this object. So we just need to have its own global variable. We just have to be outside of the return object and inside of the function. So let's go ahead and create a const, and it's going to be outer border value, and that's going to equal our string of 1px solid black, and then we're just going to make another one, and this one's going to be inner border value, and we're just going to add a line there, and we have inner border value here. So now we just have to apply them, and to do that we're going to add, let's see, we're just going to copy this one right here. So we'll go ahead and copy this one, and we're going to go down to our outer border. So here we would need it. So we're just going to go ahead and get rid of this. All right, and outer border bottom, that's the same. And then we have outer border left, that would be the same here. And then we have outer border right, that's the same. And now we're down to the inner borders, which is fine. So we'll go up here and we'll just copy that value, and we're going to go ahead and go, okay, boom, inner value, and there's only two of them, inner values. So looking at this here, looks like we got everything right here. And you know what we're going to do? Let's open this up a little bit and try out what we're doing here. So let's make our outer border a bit different than our inner border. So we'll go ahead and save that work here. And then we're just going to look around to make sure. Let's do another thing too. Let's use our library and say, you know what? Let's make our columns 40 and let's make our rows 30. So we're going to get out, I'm going to make a little bit of a rectangle here and see what happens. And so now that that's done, we can save our work, which we just did right here, and we're going to go ahead and load it in the browser. So we got a browser here, it's already loaded. Let's just refresh. And I got a reference error, so we're just going to open that up, tells us where we're going. Column, this right here is the wrong column, and that's a copy paste error. So let's go back and correct my error on that one. The code.js file, it was right down here. I remember doing it now. This column. So there's a couple different things coming in, but we wanted to ask this column. That's the one that we wanted. So this is going to be there. Column has, and I'm going to save work. So if you did that as well, just make sure you update that. That was down on the create row function, and it was a copy paste error I had from COL from way up here on the other has, which is fine. These things happen. So now that we have that, we've saved our work. Let's go back to the browser, which is the wrong way. Here we go. And we'll go ahead and open the console, and we'll refresh again, and it's gone. Now let's open this up a little bit because I can't even see this maze. It's actually kind of too big once again. And we can already see that we're running into some issues here. So let's go back to our library. And the columns are fine, but the rows, let's dial that back. So we're going to go to 20. And we can see if we refresh it now that we have some issues with our bottom border. So let's go ahead and see if we can fix that next. We'll go back to our code base here, and we'll just go to our code.js file, and let's see, we'll start here at the top. Okay, so we have the issue with the border bottom overwriting it. And can you guess perhaps where that might be? Where do we need to fix that? So if you remember, we do set an outer border and we do set an inner border on the bottom. And there's an area in here where we're setting the inner border right here the bottom inner border randomly. So you can see that if we look and study this here, there is a border all the way across, but some of it is the outer border and some of it is the inner border. So we can see at some times it's overwriting it or selecting the randomly assigned border. And if we go here, we can say, okay, because we set the rows down here, if you remember, we're setting the top and the bottom borders for the outer border. So this happens as we create the row. So that's the first thing we're doing. And then later on, we're going in there and we're saying, hey, randomly select if you want to apply a border to the bottom again. And in this case, we don't want to do it if it's the last row. So what we need to say is if we're going to add a bottom randomly, and then guess what? What would we have to put next to this? We need two conditions. So we don't need an either or, like if this is true or something else is true. What we need is a and to do that in JavaScript, it's a double ampersand, and the pipes were a double pipe is or. So in this case, we need double ampersand, and now we need to say, are you the last row again? So when doing this with the array and the row index, I always like to surround them first in a parentheses. It's not needed, but I think it makes it clean to say everything in here needs to be true. And what it would be is the row index, right, which we're passing in from the loop, and we're going to say not equal. So we could say equal to this, but what we're going to say is not equal. Oops, only 2 on that one. So not equal to, and then in this case, I'm going to add one more set of parentheses and say the row array length minus 1. So this is a self-contained thing to be like, what's the row length? And then is that better not be equal to the row index? And then this is surrounded in its own parentheses, and that could be the whole value of what comes after the ampersands. So add bottom should be true, and this also should be true. It should not be the last row. So let's go ahead and save. We'll go ahead and save this work, and we'll go back to the browser, and we'll hit our refresh button. And we could see that, yes, indeed, it has corrected the issue. In fact, let's hit it a few more times. All right, it looks really good. So let's go back and look over our code base one more time. And we're just going to do a quick scan through here. I'll start at the top here, and we're just going to look through. We've got a lot of our string values, hopefully all of them, we've gotten out of here. And we've added our own methods to take care of most of this information. And it looks, with string values in there, it gets difficult to read when there's a lot in there. And then when I look at this, having our own methods, we can easily see what's going on. We can say, okay, this column is setting the inner border bottom. Great. We look, oh, it's doing it again. Inner border bottom empty. Okay, we know what that is. Randomize, now set. So the level of instructions we can read is working out real nice. And I can see a couple items right here. Does everyone remember the append method that we did for our library? So we got a couple appends here we can update. And looking through the rest of this, now we're back to the sets, and that's good. I only caught those 2 appends. So what did we do with the appends before? So that was way up here. And we had an append here. We had a view append, and we created the add. So let's see, did we have any more? We just have 1 in there. And in the library, if we remember, we were saying element append, and then we were saying if you're an array, great. We're going to use the ellipsis here, just the spread operator, to unpack the array for us. And if you're not an array, we're going to pack you up into an array and still use the spread. And that way we can just say append, instead of saying append child, we can use it for everything. So if we go down here again, we're going to go to the append. We can see both of these cases, they're already arrays, but we don't have to do the ellipsis. So let's go ahead and get rid of the ellipsis, and we're going to go ahead and add our method that we had. And then we're going to take care of this one, and it's going to be the same thing. We're going to say add because that's all we have to do. We're using our library. And in this case, let's go ahead and save our work. And let's go back to the browser. And I'm going to open up the console, make sure we're not tricking ourselves here. And we're going to hit refresh. And I don't see any console errors. I see our maze is working. It's randomly generating as it was supposed to still. And it looks great. So we've completed our maze. Or is it? So let me know if you have or see any issues. We have completed the maze logic for this project. So in the next video, we'll start wrapping up our project with some bling. If you've enjoyed this video, click like and then subscribe buttons to get notifications of new content. Thank you for exploring programming with me, and I'll see you in the next video.